Hi, this is Jen Rubin, editor-in-chief of The Contrarian. I am happy to have with us Haile Soifer, who is the leader of the Jewish Council of Jewish Democratic Council, rather, of America. Welcome.
Thanks, Jen.
Very, very tragic, sad events in Australia. What do we know about what actually happened?
Yeah. So we know this was a depraved act of anti-Semitism targeting a Hanukkah event on a crowded beach that appears to have been carried out by a father and son that's led to the horrific murder of 15 people and injured about 40. And today we're thinking about the victims. There was a 10-year-old named Matilda who was likely there with her family. There were bubbles, there was music on the beach to celebrate Hanukkah. Her sister witnessed her murder. We're thinking about the 87-year-old Holocaust survivor who was tragically killed defending his wife, using his body to defend her. And just imagine surviving the Holocaust and 8 decades later being murdered in cold blood on a beach at a Hanukkah event in Australia. It's just horrific to envision. We're also thinking about the those injured, including 43-year-old fruit shop owner Ahmed Al-Ahmed, who tackled and disarmed at least one of the perpetrators and clearly prioritized saving lives over his own. And his act of heroism, I think, is deserving of our praise and our prayers. He was shot. I believe he's undergoing surgery today. And we are thinking of him, and there's just a sense of collective gratitude for such a selfless act of heroism.
We have not determined exactly the affiliation, exactly the motives of these two individuals, but we do know they obviously had targeted a Jewish celebration. The reaction of the Australian government was quite heartening. Talk to us a little bit about how they reacted and how that's a model for embracing not only the Jewish community, but speaking out against hatred and violence in general.
Yes. So the investigation into the specifics surrounding this attack are still ongoing, but the government of Australia was very clear at the outset that this was a hate crime. It was clear that they targeted this Hanukkah event, they targeted Jews. And we're glad to see that. We're glad to see it identified for what it is, which was clearly a violent act of anti-Semitism. But it didn't exactly happen in a vacuum. And it does appear that the government of Australia really didn't heed warnings for some time of growing anti-Semitism and a growing sense of insecurity among their Jewish community and Jews around the world about the situation in Australia, especially since October 7th. So 2 days after October 7th, the Sydney Opera House was lit up, the colors of the Israeli flags, and I think there was an intention in providing Jews in Australia, keep in mind this is the eighth largest Jewish community of any country in the world, a public space to mourn. And instead, that incident drew more than 1,000 pro-Palestinian protesters, some of whom were using anti-Semitic phrases and rhetoric, and it was deeply troubling. And there have been similar incidents since that time, including some acts of violence. In July, there was a man who set fire to a door of a synagogue in Melbourne. In August, the Australian government actually expelled Iranian diplomats. They accused Iran of that attack in Melbourne, but also of a kosher restaurant in Sydney. And amid these attacks in the past 2 years, there's been growing fear among Jews globally that the Australian government hasn't been doing enough to protect the Jewish community, but also that the demonization of Jews, of Israel, of Zionism had become normalized in Australia. And here it's important for us to consider that anytime Jews are demonized as a people, are targeted, are potentially hurt due to the real or perceived actions of the Israeli government or the Israeli military, that is anti-Semitism. People can critique the Israeli government, as many Jewish Americans and Israelis themselves do, but we cannot blame the Jewish people collectively for the actions of the government of Israel. And when this line is crossed and the Jewish community globally, or in this case in Australia, maybe collectively blame for the actions of the Israeli government, violent anti-Semitism can occur. And we've actually seen it occur here, even in the United States, 3 times in the past 6 months. You had the firebombing of Governor Shapiro's residence in April. We had the tragic murder of 2 Israeli government employees in Washington in May, and the targeting and firebombing of a peaceful gathering in Boulder, Colorado, that led to the murder of 1 person and injury of 14. These were incidents of anti-Israel sentiment manifesting in violent anti-Semitic violence, and it is unacceptable, and it must come to an end.
And to underscore what you said, Hallie, it is acceptable. First of all, it's part of being an American to voice views and to voice views that you and I might or might not agree with. It is also completely legitimate to criticize, even very harshly, the state of Israel. But what is not acceptable is to say that an American Jew whose political and geopolitical views may be entirely unknown, to hold that person responsible for what is happening in Israel, any more than if we were to take an American Russian immigrant and blame him or her for what Russia is doing in Ukraine. And that, I think, is the distinction we are talking about. Even before October 7th, anti-Semitism was on the rise spectacularly throughout the world, throughout the Western world. It has replaced many other forms of hate crimes as a very high-ranking sort of crime, which is remarkable given comparatively how few Jews live in America. Talk to us about how big a problem it is and the number of events that we now see. And these, again, this is not somebody criticizing Israel. This is a act of violence or other anti-Semitism directed at an individual. What's the magnitude of the problem we're seeing now?
Acts of anti-Semitism, violent acts of anti-Semitism, incidents like what we've just seen have increased every single year in the past 5 years that folks have been tracking this. And it really is astounding in terms of the exponential increase, but also the sense of insecurity that Jews have and the degree to which we are concerned about the rise, both in anti-Semitic incidents, but also threats and this feeling of insecurity that we have. Every single Jew in America is likely thinking about this today and thinking about how to harden our own security. And we see this at our Jewish institutions that are similar going into many of our Jewish institutions, like going through TSA. That was never the case. In the fall of 2018 in Pittsburgh, we saw the largest massacre of Jews in American history at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. There we had 11 people killed in a synagogue by a right-wing extremist. And we see since then an attempt to harden our Jewish institutions in terms of security, but clearly more must be done. And also, of course, we have to think about the root causes. Whereas that attack was driven by the far right, we also, as I mentioned, now see forms of anti-Semitism that have emerged on the left, and even anti-Israel sentiment manifesting itself in anti-Semitic sentiment and violence. And so it is a truly a large and growing problem that we must address. And, there are various roles I think we can all play In that, I think it's important to recognize that it's clear that governments have a role to play. The Australian government, in this case, has to do more to protect the Jewish community. I hope they've recognized that. I believe they appear to now have recognized that it shouldn't have taken a horrific attack like this. Our own government, the Trump administration, has a role to play here. They should be adopting a whole of government approach to combat anti-Semitism, similar to that adopted by the Biden administration in May of 2023. Instead, we've seen from this administration and this president's efforts to exploit the rise of anti-Semitism on college campuses, for example, to defund universities, even to deport international students without due process. We've seen the defunding of programs at the Department of Justice that are to fight hate crimes, at the Department of Education, the office that is responsible for combating anti-Semitism on campus, the Office of Civil Rights, largely defunded. And we've seen attacks on our democracy, levels of magnitude we've never seen before. And there has to be recognition that Jewish safety and security are inextricably linked with the safety and security and strength of our democracy, because strong democratic institutions are the key to fighting hatred, including anti-Semitism. And when democratic institutions are eroded and weakened, as we've seen in this administration, our ability to fight hatred is also weakened. It's not a coincidence that that anti-Semitism is rising as democracy is being eroded here at home. We've also seen President Trump himself, embolden dangerous right-wing extremists. Whether it was his first day in office when he pardoned and released from jail more than 1,500 insurrectionists, or even his hiring and promoting within his administration of some who hold very extreme views, including one official recently promoted who said he has a Nazi streak. So measures must be taken within even our own government to combat anti-Semitism and all forms of hatred. And I would say that this administration's attacks on our democracy are doing exactly the opposite. Um, and then, of course, we all must recognize, as I mentioned earlier, that anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, anti-Israel sentiment, it can manifest in anti-Semitic violence. And we have to recognize that this is unacceptable. And today, I would say an important message for all of us in the Jewish community, but beyond, is reach out to your Jewish friends with a message of solidarity and support.
Yes.
There is a sense of vulnerability, and it is Hanukkah. We're celebrating for 8 days the story of overcoming adversity with resilience, triumphing, finding light amid darkness. And we could use that support to build our resilience in this moment. There's a sense of vulnerability which I have not seen before. And I think we are certainly strongest when we stand together.
Absolutely. And for those of you who are not Jewish, or maybe if you are Jewish, Hanukkah is a very public celebration. In fact, you're commanded to put the menorah in your window so other people can see. So it was particularly poignant that in a public celebration of this holiday that people were struck down. And I think we should also point to those public statements from the United States that were extremely appreciated, extremely appropriate in embracing the Jewish community and making the point that you make that if anybody among us is unsafe, is vulnerable, that makes all of us unsafe and vulnerable. Um, Ellie, if people are concerned about either their personal safety or an incident that happens at school or something that a public official says or does, where can they turn to? What can they go for information? What can they do to help formulate a response or maybe just even to explain something to their own family members?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we are here as a resource, jewishdems.org, info at jewishdems.org. We are here to support to support the Jewish community throughout the country. We're an organization of Jewish voters, but first and foremost, we're advocating in defense of our values, including defending our community against this rise of anti-Semitism. So please do reach out. And if there is a real and present threat, certainly please contact law enforcement, contact the FBI. These are unfortunately the times that we are in. I myself have had to do so in recent years. We are all thinking about how to harden our security, but if you're looking for a place to discuss the growing sense of insecurity you may have in your community, in a school, wherever it may be, please do reach out to us, and we are here for you.
Thank you so much, Haley. It is a very troubling time, but as I was talking to my co-founder, Norm Eisen, who you know very well this morning, we also have to look for the unbelievable self-sacrifice and humanity expressed by that Syrian immigrant to Australia who risked his own life to save countless others. And I think amidst all of the hatred and the darkness and the terrible events, there are people, first responders, ordinary citizens, members of other faith-based communities that have acted responsibly. And again, we are not saying that this should diminish public debate, public argument, public protest against anything the Israeli government may be doing or saying. This is about violence directed at American Jews and Jews around the world. And that's a issue of national and really international concern. And Haley, what you said is so important about democracy. When we had a whole of government approach, it was very evident that the cause of democracy and the fight against anti-Semitism are inextricably intertwined because the enemy of both is irrationality, conspiracy theories, a desire to have a monoculture that excludes groups that are not in the majority. So we thank you. We thank everything you are doing. We wish you a wonderfully happy, joyous, bright Hanukkah. And for those of you who aren't Jewish, as Haley said, call a friend, see how they're doing. Just check in.
Friend,
It will
neighbor.
be it will be absolutely appreciated. So thank you so much, Haley. We'll look forward to seeing you hopefully in better times. So take care. Bye bye.
Thanks, Ben.